Welcome, good evening. I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Tonight, a look at ethics and is it ethical? But first, our contestants over here in this corner, Miller Hudson III, policy hack for years. I don't even know how to describe you.
General purpose troublemaker.
Troublemaker. And the director of the Ethics Watch, Luis Toro III. They're both the third. I'm not making that up, both the third. All right, I want to talk a little bit about particularly what's going on with Secretary of State Gessler, some of the accusations, how the process works. A lot of this comes from Amendment 41. Could you tell us what Amendment 41 is and what it does?
Sure. For those who are around may remember in 2006 we had Amendment 41 on the ballot that basically does three major things. One, the gift ban, which was the most controversial part of the amendment, the thing that people talked about the most, that limits most gifts to state officials or employees to $50 a year adjusted for inflation. So that's now $53. Number two is that it establishes
$53.
Correct. It's now $53.
So now it's dinner and a cup of coffee.
The dinner was 50 then, and it's 53 now. At least that's the theory. Then there was the anti-revolving door provision, which says that members of the legislature can't turn around and lobby the legislature until there's a 2-year cooling off period, which has almost been forgotten because it hasn't proved to be as big of an obstacle as people have expected. The third is to make Colorado one of the now 41 states that has a state ethics commission that has jurisdiction to investigate and have hearings on violations of not only Amendment 41's gift ban and revolving door ban itself, but any other ethics standard that's in state law, such as the state ethics code that predates Amendment 41. And they've had opinions and arguments about other standards of conduct, like provisions about employees taking information when they leave the state to work for competitors. Things like that have been subjects of advisory opinions.
This has been a tricky little amendment, and it was backed heavily by Jared Polis, and he funded it. And when you're a millionaire, you don't need to worry about somebody buying you lunch. But 41 has been difficult for legislators and also public employees in a lot of ways, that now there needs to be record keeping of how many times you took somebody out for lunch, if you took somebody out for lunch, things like going to ALEC or any sort of meeting that's out of state. You know, that's if somebody wants to sponsor you, you can't do this. 41 overall, has it been a good thing, a bad thing?
Well, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, was Colorado one of those states like New Jersey, New Mexico, our friends down there, that have a long history of corruption and bribery and payments under the table? And the answer is no. I've been involved.
Because our unethical stuff is right there in front. It's like, here you go. This is my land. Put an RTD stop here. I'll give you money for fast track. It's really open.
in some ways, that could be true. But the point is that there's no history of lots of problems in Colorado. I've been involved in the legislature since 1978. And in that entire period of time, I only know of one legislator that maybe took some favors for their votes. We don't have this history.
You go
to Florida,
who's that?
I'm not going to say.
Tell me, who's that?
There was no evidence. But in Florida, when I visited my parents when they were retired down there, you picked up the paper. It didn't matter when you flew in. There was some developer that had paid an inspector to let them dump their sewage directly into the Gulf. I mean, there was a culture of corruption. We don't have that here in Colorado. And I think that creating the Ethics Commission plays into this narrative that all of our elected officials are thieves and thugs.
Yeah, they are. All right, let's bring it back to bring it back to 41. I want to talk about this ethics commission. I think we worked out the other part. Seem to be pretty self-explanatory. I think they've had some real consequences that we weren't looking for. But this ethics board, what makes up the ethics board? Who's on the ethics board?
It's a commission of 5 that are appointed in turn by the House, the Senate, the governor, and the Chief Justice. Then the 4 appoint the 5th, who must be a member of a local government or an employee or an elected official, because Amendment 41 applies not just to the state government, but to local governments, except for home rule cities that have their own ethics codes, like Denver or Colorado Springs. They all have their own separate.
Let's see if I got this right. So there's 5 people on the board. The governor gets to choose somebody. The House collectively chooses somebody.
Right.
The Senate does that, and of
Chief
course,
Justice.
Chief Justice. Tell me if my arithmetic is wrong on this, but we've got Democrat, 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 Democrat. Is it lopsided? How that seems to be leaning one way here.
Well, it's funny because when there was a vacancy the entire year, that was the last year of Speaker McNulty's term as Speaker, and we kept saying, there's a vacancy, Mr. Speaker, please name someone, and it didn't happen. And so that vacancy, there was an actual vacancy when Dorothy Butcher of Pueblo left the Ethics Commission that was unfilled for that entire year that Speaker McNulty could have filled. And so it was very surprising to us to hear that now, that this has become the new talking point. The Democrats made all the appointments. I guess we're assuming that Chief Justice Bender is a Democrat. I don't actually know that. But certainly Speaker McNulty had his chance to do it and missed. And more to the point, I don't think anybody thinks
is it just the Speaker, or is it?
Well,
is
the
it
Speaker, the tradition has been that the Speaker or the President of the Senate names their person, but it is submitted to a vote. So and I'm not aware of any dissents. I know the most recent appointee was Dorothy Marshall, who finally was appointed to fill the House. The House seat was vacant for a full year. When Dorothy Butcher left at the end of 1 year, there was a full year under McNulty when it was not filled, and then when Ferrandino came in, they appointed Rosemary Marshall to that seat. But generally, there hasn't been any dispute about that. But about who gets appointed, it's been by consensus. But Matt Smith is a Republican. Sally Hopper is a Republican. These are people. The Constitution says you can have no more than two of any one party. So it's been. Right now, it's 2 Dems, 2 Republicans, and then the mayor of Estes Park, who's an independent.
As a guy who has fought a lot of Republicans on liberal issues, the party label doesn't matter a whole lot to me.
I think that's the way it's played out. Yes.
But let me ask you. You might say that we're not a corrupt state. I'm going to disagree with you. And when I joked about it being out in the open, I feel that's the way it is. When you take a look at how bonding deals are done, so a bonding house will say to a school board, we'll run the election, we'll take care of the mill levy fight, we're going to finance the election, we'll take care of all of it, and in exchange, right there on a piece of paper, you sign that when we win this mill levy increase, you'll use us for your debt service. Now, that's, to me, unethical. That seems wrong. The pay to play that goes on in the state for tax increases, fast tracks is something like 95% of all the money that came into that were people who could get something from the project. Now, that's out in the open. That's the bigger stuff than finding somebody doing something unethical, like spending too much money on or getting gifts.
Right, but you're talking about structural problems with the election process, and it goes into how we fund campaigns, and there's always been a kind of a pay-for-play ethos, even if it's not maybe as visible as you paint it. There are firms that specialize in school board bond issues, and they go out and they coach the school boards on how to present it, which firms to hire to run the campaigns. But that is all more or less open. The ethicality of it is subject to debate, and in some cases, there's no question that it's been unethical. But the Election Commission was created to deal with that, the personally unethical state employee, the personally unethical legislator. And I'm arguing there are not enough of them out there, at least in Colorado, to be worth the price that we're paying.
Well, the price that we're paying, these guys on the ethics board aren't paid, are they?
That's correct.
What's wrong with the idea of having some facility that you say, this guy I think is on the take. What he did I think is wrong. Usually we'd bring that up with a Secretary of State. It would be some sort of campaign violation. What's wrong with having a committee that says we're going to look at this and judge it by this set of principles?
Well, what we're doing is we're creating a double standard. There's a set of criminal law here, and look at Adams County. There's, I think, 5 people in jail and a couple of more headed that way because of corruption and contracting and favors between elected officials. Fine. Go to the district attorney, give it to him, prosecute him for it. I think that the problem that we've created is we have created this new chamber where anybody can file a complaint of unethicality. Now, and you know, this is like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. And, you know, I know we're going to talk about the Gessler case shortly. You know, do I think Scott Gessler was smart in terms of using his discretionary account to go to a Republican convention? And the Republican lawyers, no, probably not. But was it illegal? I don't think it was illegal in the slightest. The grand jury reached the same conclusion.
You run an organization called Ethics Watch, and you're known, whether you like it or not, for picking on Republicans. Yeah, you'll throw a few out there, but my team hasn't been able to put together something like your team has, and you really do keep up with these guys. I remember what happened with Mike Kaufman for so many years, dogging him on something. I forget how that turned out. It bored me to death after a while. But your job at Ethics Watch is to file complaints. Why do you need this star chamber of an ethics board if they're breaking the law? Why don't you just put criminal complaints?
Well, those are two different sets of laws. I mean, yes, there's criminal laws, but we've always had this state ethics code that was just kind of sitting on the books with no real enforcement mechanism. It had a lot of things that it said state employees and officials should and should not do, but there was only enforcement for some kind of disgorgement lawsuit if you found that in a certain case they got some financial windfall out of it. So there was a disconnect between what the ethics code said you should do and what the actual teeth of the ethics code are. So the Ethics Commission comes in and fills that void, like in many other states, for things that don't rise to the level of criminal conduct but still violate the ethics standards that the state has on the books.
Can't these become witch hunts? I mean, I saw what happened to Mike Kaufman, and it screamed political partisan witch hunt to me.
Well, I think you were wrong about that, but be that as it may, the way the Ethics Commission is supposed to work is that they have an initial screening to throw out those meritless complaints, and then what the Constitution says is then they investigate and have a hearing. And the problem is, you know, the legislature never liked Amendment 41. We all know that. They've always funded it to the bare bones. They didn't even want to pass legislation to help it exist, and so they've struggled along with one person on their staff, whereas a state like Oklahoma that has an ethics commission has something like 8 full-time employees. So they didn't have enough resources to do their jobs, and they developed this system that relied on the person who filed the complaint to act as a prosecutor. So that's what we've been doing. And I know that there's been some really misunderstanding of the way we operate and what we're supposed to do, and that's probably why these conservative attempts to allegedly duplicate us have failed, because they're not really duplicating what we do.
How large is Ethics Watch?
We have, it's basically 3 people that are full-time employees, and then we get law student interns and so forth.
It's a 501c3?
That's correct.
How are you funded?
Just like you, contributions.
Contributions. You want to tell us who?
Nope. Do you want to tell us who?
Never.
Well, you know.
All right.
Donors' Bill of Rights,
So
right?
let's get into this. Let's get into Scott Gessler, because that's a wonderful case in point to illustrate all this. Scott Gessler has a discretionary budget. When I was a board member at RTD, we had a travel budget. Back then it was like $3,000, and I could go to whatever I wanted to go to, assuming it was help me in my business. So I ended up going to some conferences, but they didn't tell me anything. I ended up going to a competitive contracting conference in Leeds, England. It was great. I took a few days off on my own dime, because you're in there.
Right.
Took the channel over and played there, but it was the taxpayer who put me over there. But I was involved in a 3-day privatization conference, looking at what happened in England and what happened in Australia for privatizing. All right, was that unethical for me to take that trip? I think it was perfectly appropriate for me to do so, even though I took some days off and had some fun.
Well, I would argue, John, absolutely not. It is a discretionary fund made available to you to take those actions that you think will make you a more effective representative of your constituents. That's your decision. If your constituents don't like the way you spent the money, they can toss you out at the next election. There is an accountability process, particularly for elected officials. And I think, and we look at Scott's case, you know, he is a Republican Attorney General in the state of Colorado.
And just to make sure people are up to speed, so our Secretary of State went to was it the RNC? Is that where he flew to?
But he was invited as a speaker to a Republican lawyers conference on election law that was coincidentally scheduled immediately before the Republican National Convention. And, obviously they did it at a time when they could bring a lot of people in from around the country. And Scott took advantage of that, went to that conference, and then went over to the Republican National Convention, just as you took the channel to Paris.
Well, in the same way, lots of organizations, when I go to a conference, other groups have other meetings around it because it's drawing, and so he used his discretionary budget. How much budget does he have for that?
I think $5,000 in the discretionary budget.
All right, so he spent $1,500 of that.
About $1,800.
$1,800 to go here and to. Would it have been ethical if he just went to the conference of Republican lawyers?
No.
Why not?
Because it was for his personal benefit. And so state law on this, well, first of all, your hypothetical about mixed trips is something that actually came up in the ethics hearing. Colorado does have fiscal rules about this that specifically say that when you have a mixed trip, you're supposed to allocate expenses, even the airfare. So in your example, presumably you didn't charge RTD for the days that you were on your own vacation in England, because that's the ethical thing to do. One of the problems is that if you accepted the Secretary's argument that this was a mixed trip, he should have prorated the airfare instead of charging the entire airfare to the state of Colorado, which meant we were paying for him to go to the Republican convention.
For $1,800?
Well, we'll get to that piece in a minute, because we definitely agree that this was way too drawn out and expensive, and we can talk about that as a separate issue. But the Republican Lawyers Association itself, one thing we found out in the hearing was that he's still practicing law. He asserted attorney-client privilege. When I asked him about, do you still have private clients, he couldn't do that in good faith unless he did. So after telling people that he wasn't going to moonlight, he is moonlighting.
Do you know that?
We never filed it.
Do you know that he's getting paid for this? How do you know he's moonlighting?
It's true. Maybe he's doing it all pro bono. I have to concede that all we asked him was, do you have clients? And he said, I take attorney-client privilege, so that's a yes. And he needed to keep his license alive, that he needed to collect 30 hours of CLE credit by the end of 2012.
For those who don't know, that's continuing legal education.
Correct.
It's how lawyers keep their...
So that's for his personal license. He doesn't need you don't need to be a lawyer to be Secretary of State. You do need to be a lawyer to be Attorney General. It's a huge difference. There is no requirement that the Secretary of State be a lawyer, and in general, the state doesn't pay continuing legal education for employees that don't need a law degree for their job.
But doesn't it help him become a better Secretary of State?
Well,
if he's doing continuing legal education, the man's hip deep in law. Matter of fact, I've sued him plenty of times on legal issues.
Well, the AG handles that, but the other part of it is that you can't use state money on any event that's primarily designed to promote the interests of a political party or a candidate. Well, obviously, the Republican National Lawyers Association is primarily intended to help the Republican Party.
Come on. Then what's the difference? What's the difference between
disagree.
ALEC and I'm trying to remember the liberal
NCSL?
NCSL. You have one that leans
really
toward the left and one that leans towards the right.
You've got like the traditional standard one, and then you have the new right-wing one. Is the way I would characterize it.
Well,
But either way,
no, I've been very involved with ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council, and they bring together legislators and they put together model legislation. They have committees. They vote on different things. It's pretty pro stuff. Here in Colorado, there's the NCSL, which is the liberal version of that, and I've spoken at some of these events. Let me tell you. It has as much left as you think the other one is right.
Yeah.
But legislators actually learn things there by speaking to other legislators, by looking at different policies, by having those arguments. It seems. Why would that be wrong? Going to an NCSL would be, let's bring it over here for a second.
Right.
Okay,
well, I want to come back and say we're getting lost in the weeds here. We have a Republican Secretary of State. I didn't vote for him when he ran last time. Probably will never vote for him if he runs again, whatever he runs for. But Scott Gessler is a Republican Attorney General. If he thinks he can be a more effective Attorney General for the people of Colorado, exercising his discretion by attending a conference of Republican lawyers that are going to discuss election law, I think that's his prerogative. That's what the discretionary account is there for. As our president says,
that's the term discretionary.
Right. As our president says, elections have consequences. One of the consequences is if you elect a Republican Attorney General or a Republican Secretary of State, they're likely to confer with other Republicans.
Would you agree with me if he was spending his discretionary fund because he wanted to go to Barbados for a weekend and he just came up with meeting somebody there for a cocktail that could help him out on something? You'd have to look at that and go, wait a second, that's not ethical.
Yeah, right. That would make you hold your nose.
All right. So the discretionary isn't completely discretionary. It has to be involved somehow in his role
Right.
as an elected official.
That's correct.
All right. Back it up to Miller's level. This certainly has to do with what he does. He's meeting with fellow attorneys. He's a Secretary of State. He deals in legal matters. He's a lawyer himself. How does that not fit in with the being his discretionary income or discretionary fund to do that?
Well, that's exactly what the Ethics Commission was asked to decide, and what they determined was, first of all, the state prohibits spending money on events that are primarily designed to help a political party, period. So I think your ALEC and NCSL opinion or analogy is false for a couple reasons. One is they're not actually, people might hyperbolically say that ALEC is an arm of the Republican Party, but they're not literally an arm of the Republican Party.
Trust me, the Republican Party doesn't have it together enough to have an arm. So that's not the issue.
Well, actually it is. And the other part of it is that ALEC and NCSL actually have kind of a special exemption from the gift ban because by statute before Amendment 41, they were already designated as joint agencies of the state of Colorado. And there was an opinion of the Ethics Commission that's been reinforced by statute that basically lets people go to those events and considers your dues to pay back.
This is a way to get after a candidate is going to run for re-election or governor. This is $1,800 to go to a meeting of fellow lawyers. How is that? How does it rise to this level? Because we, the taxpayers, have now spent probably a lot more than that $1,800 on this what seems to be frivolous issue.
Well, how much do you think a public official should be allowed to walk away with before it becomes significant? I mean, $5,000, $10,000? I mean, that's a real question.
Walk away with. If I understand, wait.
Yeah.
If I understand correctly, he didn't walk away with anything. He has a discretionary fund. He used that discretionary fund to go do continuing legal education, which helps his field. That's not walking away. If there's money going into Scott Gessler's pocket that way, then by all means, I will join you on that complaint.
It's essentially the same thing because we, the people, paid for him to get what is essentially free continuing legal education credit for his personal law license that doesn't benefit the state of Colorado at a partisan event. Let me ask you this question.
When union when union teachers take time off and are still paid and work on union activities, isn't that a violation? When school districts pay a teacher to actually be a union rep, how is that not unethical? Why aren't you suing on that?
Well, it's a negotiated contract. You know that. It's a negotiation. That's part of the compensation.
I think, Luis, you're misrepresenting the fact. The CLE was attached to this particular conference. He went to the conference about election law. The fact that it was going to offer CLE credits was a bonus.
Well, that's not the way they argued the case. I mean, they put it the other way around. Like, this is CLE, therefore it doesn't have anything to do. So you're putting on a different defense than they did. They said because this is CLE, it can't be touched.
So if any employee of a government goes to a CLE class, is that a problem?
We should not be paying for it unless it's part of their job to have a law degree, that they're working for us as a lawyer. So one of the points they made was, well, the Attorney General goes to CLEs on the state's dime. Well, of course he does. The Attorney General has to be a lawyer with an active license, but the Secretary of State doesn't. So that's the huge distinction.
What if I find an employee of the government who's a lawyer, doesn't necessarily need to be a lawyer for his job, but also goes to, I don't know, let's say a Federalist Society event and collects CLE points there? Are you going to file?
Well, is the paid for by the state? Because that's the key.
Yeah,
so the state's.
This is the chief election law officer of our state. Happens to be a lawyer. A lot of people would say that was a bonus. I mean, I really think that we are lost in the weeds on this thing in the trivia. And Luis, over the amounts of dollars that were involved here, what you're encouraging is soon John and his friends will fund an ethics watch organization on the right, and then we will be taking.
We're trying to get to Pat Stryker and Tim Gill.
You should just fund us. I mean, if you really believe that we're so corrupt that we'll just go after whoever
we never said
funders tell us.
But no, come on.
You should contribute to us.
Can you deny that you go after Republicans far and away more often than you do Democrats?
I think what we've tried. Well, I'm going to say no, because more often than not we go against these third-party groups that claim not to be part of either party. Like, for example.
All right, let's rephrase. Is it mostly conservative candidates and organizations you go after?
That's. I think that.
Just say yes.
I guess you'd have to look, and that's probably true. Sure.
Just say yes. All right, we've got a minute. We only have a couple minutes left here. What's the problem that you have with the ethics board? All right, so Tim Gill and Pat Stryker can give this guy enough money to hire a few people to keep doing this to people. My guys aren't paying for somebody to do that. Shame on our guys. What's wrong with the structure of this supposedly independent star chamber? What's wrong with it?
I think the entire process. First off, these people are not lawyers. It's run on a seat of the pants basis from what I've seen. There are not rules of procedure that give you a lot of confidence. But I think there's a bigger problem, and that is that its mere existence besmirches those who work for government, those who run for office, and absent any long evidence, can you give me 3 cases of gross unethical behavior before 2006 that made it necessary to have this commission? The guy who's on the snowplow at the Eisenhower Tunnel at 4 a.m. is not taking Broncos tickets.
All right, let me ask you a quick question. We've only got half a minute left. What happened with Scott Gessler? The Star Chamber found him guilty, not guilty, but a court found him innocent. What happened? Real fast, 30 seconds.
I don't know what happens. I think more money is spent.
Well, the secret grand jury found that it didn't rise to the level of criminal beyond a reasonable doubt, whereas the Public Ethics Commission, using a civil standard of preponderance of the evidence, found that it did meet that standard.
So the court said...
well, there was no court involved. It's a grand jury.
So the grand jury said not a big deal, but the
they didn't say that. They scolded him pretty strongly.
The Democratic group with 4 Democrats said no, this is wrong.
4 Democrats?
Picked by Democrats. See you next week. Am I wrong?